Really, the other big news that kind of carries over from Friday, but since we joined you last, is late Friday morning. The three men who were accused of playing a role in the plot to kidnap the governor are now free men.
After 3 years since being arrested, Eric Molitor and brothers William and Michael Knoll have been found innocent. This was the final trial in the plot to kidnap the governor, a case that initially saw 14 men arrested. Our trial expert Jamie White joins us now on Good Day to talk about how the jury might not have led to a guilty verdict. Jamie, thank you so much once again for joining us to give us your insight here, and good day to you.
Thank you. Good day to you guys as well.
So yeah, please start us off, Bill.
I was going to say, give us your first reaction. This the jury came out on Friday. I kind of expected them to go a little bit later in the day than they did on Friday,
but quick.
Friday morning they came out with a verdict, and just curious your take on what you thought when you heard the announcement.
Sure. I'll give you my personal opinion, but I do want to say that I think over the last few years we're hearing more and more attacks on juries and prosecutors and judges when maybe a certain political view doesn't appear to be in the interest of those particular individuals. And so, I just want to say I respect the jury system. I believe that as a free country, we have to rely on their results and be careful about super criticizing before or after the fact. With that said, guys, I was surprised by the verdict. I certainly thought that there was a possibility of a hung jury. Getting 12 people to agree on anything when there's politics attached has become almost an insurmountable task. But I was surprised to see that these men were acquitted. As to why, we can all speculate. There's been some off-the-record conversations with jurors, but what I would say, and I think we talked about this a few weeks ago, these are some tough legal definitions, right? Terrorism, for example. Many people associate terrorism with the World Trade Center and, other things that we see happening around the world. Sure. And I think sometimes that's hard to translate into a domestic setting, especially where people hold political views that are, whether you like them or you don't like them, these are important to them. And I also believe that the definition of material assistance could have been a hang-up for this jury. We've seen this charge acquitted before in even more serious circumstances. Most recently and most publicly was the driver for Osama bin Laden. I think a lot of people were surprised to see that outcome, but that is in fact what led to his acquittal. So I think by way of speculation, there's multiple reasonable bases for their acquittal. I personally was disappointed. I just don't think we should live in a society where the governor, who I do know personally, I'll be transparent, has had to live under a certain level of anxiety, and her security team having to take extra precautions. I think there's a line, and I think that line was drawn personally, but I respect the conclusions of the jury.
I'm curious what you make. The first thing that I thought of too was the definition of terrorism, and I kind of was surprised that there weren't other charges as well, because how do you rise to that level of a terrorist act? And so that kind of crossed my mind.
That's kind of where, where my question was going was, do you think we charge them too? Again, I have no idea what I'm talking about, sorry. Too high, too aggressive of charges, trying to make them out to be terrorists?
Well, I think it created a unique challenge for the jury. Again, these definitions are complicated. They're widely spread in the media. And, the jury instruction itself would require that they use the force of threat of force to affect politics, in effect. That's a tough leap. There certainly were other charges, conspiracy to kidnap and some other things that maybe could have been focused on more. I expect the Attorney General is going to do a deep dive, going backwards, take a careful look at this, and in the event we have further problems, maybe address things differently. But 12 people found them not guilty, and I think we have to accept that on its face, despite your political affiliations. That's what makes this country great.
The other half of that equation really that kind of jumped out at me was the firearms charge, and Was that a firearms charge in the act of a terrorist act or as part of the terrorist act? Were those linked?
Yeah.
Because there didn't seem to be any question that there were firearms involved. But again, if you
Correct.
don't have the terrorist act, then you can't convict on the firearms during a terrorist act. Am I understanding that right?
You are understanding that correctly. So the charge was being in possession of a weapon during the course of a felony. So, if in fact there's no felony, it's a very difficult leap for the juror to find you were in possession during a felony. But it would not have required only association with the terrorist act. To your earlier point, had there been other felonies charged that could have been associated with the weapon, Mr. Molitor, I believe, would have served a mandatory 2 years in prison with no parole. That didn't happen, and I do think that's based on the fact the jury found no underlying felony associated with the weapon.
Gotcha. So it seems like there was some accountability that could have been found here, but because things were kind of lumped into this terrorism, that it kind of muddied the waters, for lack of a better way of putting it.
I think that's a fair assumption. I think we can all agree. I'm actually in Sheboygan right now. I have a home up here. I love the people up here, but this is a conservative environment. And I think that the issues that were put in front of the jury were difficult to understand and arguably inflamed potentially some of the opinions on the jurors. And again, they saw the evidence. They saw all of the evidence that we didn't see. They heard the jury instructions. And for the sake of stability in our world, I think we have to believe that they came to a decision that was reasonable under the circumstances that they were in.
Last question for you, Jamie, and just real briefly, what's your experience with juries in general, not necessarily in this specific case, but the longer the trial goes on, does that affect how long the deliberations go? Being a Friday, are they typically in a hurry just to be done and get out of there? Not to say that they don't take their job seriously, but just kind of was curious to your thoughts or your experience, historically speaking, on what juries might be up against as that trial, we're entering a third week and the threat of it going into a fourth week and whatnot.
That's a great question. Books have been written about this, volumes and volumes of books. I've tried more than 100 cases, and about 10 trials in, we would approach the jury, provide our contact information, and invite all of them or some of them out to dinner, not for the purpose of them telling us how good we were. We would most often be interested when we'd lose a trial. And, be very candid with them that, we want to buy them dinner, but we want to hear the brass tacks of why they made the decisions they made. And so to answer your question, it's unbelievable how all over the charts juries can be. Sometimes it's the littlest thing that they will come back and tell you made their decision. And, when I was doing criminal law, the prosecutor and I would look at each other, we had been working together, and 9 times out of 10, we were good friends. We would look at each other like, after all of that, that is what swayed them. So, jurors bring their personal experiences. They bring their biases, and so I'm not suggesting that happened here, but, sometimes you hear some really wild responses as to why jurors do what they do.
Humans, we're all different. And that's
right.
What's so fantastic about this country. Jamie White, thank you so much for your insight. We greatly appreciate it. And we'll make sure more information is available on 9and10news.com. You have a good day, sir.
You too. Thanks for having me, guys.